Hi, this is Jessica from Jessica's Journeys, and we are on Chapter 3, Heavenly Music. In the book we are reading 90 Minutes in Heaven by Don Piper and Cecil Murphy. Chapter 3 begins with a verse. Then I looked again, and I heard the singing of thousands and millions of angels around the throne of the living beings and the elders. Revelations 5:11. As a young boy, I spent a lot of time in the country in the woods. When walking through the high-waisted dry grass, I often surprised a covey of birds and flushed them out of their nest of the ground, as the whooshing sound accompanied their wings as they flew. My most vivid memory of heaven is what I heard. I can only describe it as a holy whooshing of wings, but I'd have to magnify that 1,000 times to explain the effect of the sounds of heaven. It was most beautiful and pleasant sound that I had ever heard, and it didn't stop. It was like a song that goes on forever. I felt awestruck, wanting only to listen. I didn't just hear music. It seemed as if I was part of the music, and it played and through my body. In and through my body. I stood still, and yet I was embraced by sounds. I was aware I had become in the glorious sounds and melodies that filled the air. I wasn't distracted. I felt as if the heavenly concert permeated every part of my being, and at the same time I focused on everything else around me. I never saw anything that produced the sound. I had sensed that whatever made that heavenly music was just above me, but I didn't look up. I'm not sure why. Perhaps it was because I was enamored with the people around me, or maybe it was because of my senses were so engaged that it feasted on everything at the same time. I asked no questions or wondered about anything. Part of me would have been, I guess as a curious person, would have been like, what is that sound? But you just, at that moment, he just didn't feel that way. Everything was perfect. I sensed that I knew everything and I had no questions to answer. Myriads of sounds so filled my mind and heart that it's difficult to explain. The most amazing one, however, was the angels' wings. And I didn't see them, but the sound was beautiful. The melody, the holy melody with the sound that seemed to never stop. The swishing sound resounded as if a form in a never-ending praise. It formed a never-ending praise, and I listened and I simply knew what it was. A second sound remains. Even today, the single most vivid memory of my entire heavenly experience, I call it music. But it was different from anything I had ever heard or expected to hear on earth. The melodies of praise filled the atmosphere. The non-stop intensity and endless variety overwhelmed me. The praise was unending, but the most remarkable thing to me was the hundreds of songs that were being sung at the same time, all of them worshiping God. As I approached the large, magnificent gate, I had heard that each gate was, I had heard them from every direction and realized that the praise, that each voice praised God. I write voice, but it was more than that. Some sounded like instruments, but I wasn't sure. I wasn't concerned. Praise was everywhere, and all of it was musical, yet compromised by melodies and tones I'd never experienced before. Hallelujah! Praise, glory to God, praise to the King. Such words rang out in the midst of the sound and the music. I don't know if angels were singing or if it came from humans. I felt so awestruck and caught up in the heavenly mood that I didn't look around me. My heart filled with the deepest joy I had ever experienced, and I wasn't a participant in the worship. Yet I felt as if my heart rang out with the same kind of joy and exuberance. If we played a CD, 3 CDs of praise at the same time, it would have been a terrible noise, and it would drive us totally crazy. But this was totally different. Every sound blended, and each voice and instrument enhanced the other. As strange as it may seem, I could clearly distinguish each song. It sounded like as if each hymn of praise was meant for me to hear as I moved inside the gates. Many of the old hymns and choruses that I had sung at various times in my life were part of the song, along with hundreds of them I had never heard before. Praises, hymns of praises, modern sounding choruses, and ancient chants filled my ears and brought not only deep peace, but a greatest feeling of joy I had ever experienced. As I stood at the gate, I didn't realize it, but later I realized that I didn't hear such songs as the Old Rugged Cross or the Nail-Scarred Hands. None of those hymns filled the air about Jesus, sacrifice, or death. I heard no sad songs and instinctively knew that there were no sad songs in heaven. Why would there be? All these praises of Christ's reign, and He is the King of Kings, and the joyfulness, worship for all He has done for us, and how wonderful He is. The celestial tunes surpassed any that I had ever heard, and I couldn't calculate the number of songs, perhaps thousands offered summed up simultaneously. And yet there was no chaos, because I had the capability to hear each one and to discern each lyric and melody. Wouldn't that be awesome? You could hear 1,000 songs at one time, 1,000. I always wondered what it would be like for God to hear every person's prayer at one time. How could He hear each person different? But this really tells it that each one He can discern. He can discern each person. Even if a million people were praying at one time, He can tell exactly that one person. I marveled at the glorious music. Though not possessed of a great singing voice, I knew that if I sang, my voice would be pitch perfect and would sound like a melodious and harmony as 1,000 other voices and instruments that filled my ears. Now, back on earth, sometimes I still hear faint echoes of that music. When I'm especially tired and lie in bed with my eyes closed, I drift off to sleep, and I hear the sounds of heaven filling my mind and heart. No matter how difficult a day, peace immediately fills every part of my being. And I still have flashbacks, although they're different from what we normally refer as flashbacks. Mine were more like flashbacks with the sound of light. As I pondered the meaning of the memory of this music, and it seemed curious, I would have expected it to be more memorable or experience something that had to be a physical embrace or a loved one. But yet it was this music that made me remember. Obviously, I really don't know how God feels, but I find comfort in thinking that He is pleased and blessed with my continuous sounds of praise. In those minutes, they held no sense and time for me, and others, they touched me with their embraces, were absolutely real. I saw colors that I never knew and believed existed. I've never felt more alive than I did. I was home. I was where I belong. I wanted to be there more than I ever wanted to be anywhere on earth. Time slipped away, and I was simply present in heaven. All worries and anxieties and concerns vanished. I had no needs. I felt perfect peace. I get frustrated describing what heaven was like because I can't begin to put it into words. It looked and sounded and felt like what it looked, sounded, and felt like. It was perfect, and I knew I had no needs, and neither would again, and never would again. I didn't even think of the earth and those I left behind. I did not see God, although I knew God was there. I never saw any image or luminous glow that to indicate a divine presence. I've heard of people going in and coming back out of the gate, but that didn't happen to me. I only saw bright iridescence. I peered through the gate, yearning to see what lay beyond. Now, I'm kind of confused on this part because earlier he said he walked through the gate, and this time now he's saying he wants to walk through the gate. Maybe I'm missing something. He yearns to see what lays beyond, and it wasn't anxious yearning, but a peaceful openness to experience all the grace and joy of heaven. The only way it made sense was to be part of the experience is to think that I had actually seen God. I would have never wanted to return. My feelings have been that once we're actually in God's presence, we will never want to return to earth again, because it will be empty, meaningless in comparison. For me, just the gates were amazing. In the foretaste of joy divine, it was a foretaste of joy divine. My words are feeble to describe what took place. As a pastor, I stood at the caskets of many people at a funeral. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord for those who knew him. I believe those words, and I believe them ever more now. After a time, I'm resorting to human terms again. We started moving together right up to the gate. No one said it, but I simply knew God had sent those people to escort me inside the portals of heaven. Looming just over our heads of my reception committee, there were the awesome gates. Gate interrupting a wall that faded out of sight in both directions. It struck me that the actual entrance was as small in comparison to the massive gate itself. I stared. I couldn't help and see the end of the wall. I couldn't see the end. in either direction, and I gazed upwards and I couldn't see the top. One thing did surprise me. On earth, whenever I thought of heaven, I anticipated one day I would see a great gate made of pearls, because that's what the Bible refers to, the gate of pearls, the pearly gate. The gate wasn't made of pearls, but it was pearlescence, perhaps iridescent, may be more descriptive. To me, it looked like someone had got pearl icing on a cake, and they had spread it on the gate. A gate glowed and shimmered. I paused and stared at the glorious hues and shimmering shades, and the luminescence dazzled me, and I would have been content to stay at that spot. Yet I stepped forward, and I was being escorted into God's presence. I paused just outside the gate to see the inside. It was a city with paved streets. To my amazement, there was constructed of literal gold. If you imagine a street paved with gold bricks, that's as close as you can come to describing what lay inside the gate. Everything was bright, and the brightest colors my hands had ever held, so powerful that no earthly human could take in its brilliance. In the midst of the powerful scene, I continued to step closer to the gate to assume that I would go inside. My friends and relatives all in front of me, calling, urging, inviting me to follow. Then the scene changed. All I can say is, instead of being in front of me, they were beside me. They wanted me to walk beside them, and I passed through the iridescent gate. Something people have asked me, how did you move? Did you walk? Did you float? I don't know. I just moved along with them, with a welcoming crowd. As we came closer to the gate, the music increased, and it became more vivid. It would be like walking up to a glorious event after hearing the faint sound and seeing everything from a distance. The closer we got, the more intense and alive and vivid everything became. Just as I reached the gate, my senses were more heightened and felt deliriously happy. I paused, and I'm not sure why. Just outside the gate, I was thrilled to the prospect, and I wanted to go inside, and I knew everything I would be more thrilling than I had experienced so far. At that very moment, I realized the yearning of every human heart. I was in heaven and ready to go through the pearlescent gate. During the momentary pause, something else changed. Instead of hearing the music and the thousand voices praising God, I had become part of the choir. I was one of them, and they had absorbed me in their midst. I had arrived at this place and wanted to visit for a long time. I lingered to gaze before I continued forward. Then, just as suddenly as I arrived at the gates of heaven, I left them. That's where we stop. And we will read chapter 4 later, is From Heaven to Earth. I've always heard that the gates of heaven was one giant pearl. But this makes more sense. The pearlescence looked like icing on a cake on it. If you have any questions or anything about this book, just leave me a message. And I hope you all have a wonderful day and be blessed. I will talk to you later. Thank you. Bye.